Hello, my name is Pete Saronis, and I am very excited today to host episode 16 of Anterix's Industry Insights. Forgive me there. Industry Insights show. We are going to have an incredible conversation with some incredible people. We've titled this A Conversation on Wildfire Mitigation Tools Enabled by a Private Network. We think it's very timely as we come towards the end of the official, unofficial wildfire season here in our country. And as everybody knows, if you read the paper, whether it's your zip code or not, wildfires happen, and they happen a lot more as of late. A fun fact, or should I say not so much a fun fact, but a year ago, as of August 30th, there were 42,647 fires already in our country, destroying 4,879,000 plus acres. As of this year, 2022, we have 48,057 fires, and 7,330,000 plus acres have been destroyed. And obviously that no doubt leads to loss of life. So humanizing this topic and how technology and innovation and environmental factors and concerns will be addressed. And we will reference at times the role that industry, government, academia clearly are playing to help move this needle on mitigating risk. So with that, my name's Pete Saronis. I am the former Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Department of Energy, and now the founder and CEO of Dots and Bridges. And I'm here to just hopefully have a conversation where a bunch of us will connect some dots and build some relationship bridges in the process. So with that, we have Mr. Ryan Gerbrandt, Chief Operating Officer at Anterix, Mr. Tim Stelzer, the Chief Technology Officer at LineVision, doing some great things with analytics, and Ryan Bradetich, who I will refer to as either Dr. Ryan or Dr. B for obvious reasons, folks. We have two Ryans on here. Senior Vice President for Research and Development at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Pete.
You got it.
Yeah.
Well, listen, those who know me, we're starting off with, I don't read resumes and I don't read bios. Ryan Gerbrandt, and for my guests or our guests, a little bit about you and your journey and why this topic, if you will, and Anterix is laser focused on it.
Yeah, happy to. Pete, again, first, just thank you to you. Thank you to this whole group, for joining us in this conversation today. It strikes me just hearing you give that stat to get started again, kind of why we're having this conversation. The fact that we're talking about a topic here, in terms of all of our roles as technologists and solution providers that, has such a dramatic impact, as helping us save life and limb. There's not many of those kinds of issues that I'll say that, as important as the electric grid is, the operations and the reliability of it, this one takes on a whole new character, I think, when you put it into, into that lens. And I think it's so important to think about it in terms of the criticality of that, just how important and urgent, this issue is. That I know we're going to hear great things from Ryan and Tim around kind of their solutions portfolio. But let me take a step back. So at Anterix, our focus is on how do we help drive the availability and solutions building, just like the examples we're going to talk about here in terms of wildfire mitigation and the critical role that foundational communications plays, in those devices and applications enablement. It's such an important connection. I've spent my whole career, Pete, you've heard it before, but I started a little over 20 years ago, as a communications engineer with a utility up in Canada called Manitoba Hydro, and had a chance to really see and learn what the capability could be, for the role of telecommunications, in the modernization of the electric system, and took that passion away from the utility, went work for a company in the Silicon Valley, and then continued to evolve the portfolio of knowledge around just how to be more pervasive with the role of telecommunications, what brought me to Anterix. And just super excited and passionate about kind of what we as an industry, have started to really evolve around in our learning of the fundamentals of just how important this foundational technology can be in communications. And, like I said, delighted, had a chance to get introduced through that journey to Ryan and Tim, two kind of application partners, that I think what we'll talk about today is going to be eye-opening to a lot of folks in terms of the capabilities that these companies have, and kind of the foundational role of data and information empowerment really plays as we unlock those capabilities to solve one of these most mission-critical and important issues on the grid.
100%. And Ryan, thank you. And folks, Ryan hit on a couple themes here. When you see me look down and taking notes, because they're always what I call tweetable moments, but you talked about foundational communications, you talked about mapping capabilities to mission, and ultimately what he's also, I feel I'm hearing as an audience member myself in a sense, is partnership. And you're seeing it and you're going to hear about it today, not just among these three individuals, but industry partners. So thank you. If you didn't know, Anterix is the largest holder of licensed spectrum in the 900 megahertz band throughout the contiguous United States, Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico. And that is going to be an important part of our discussion, because spectrum, whether you understand it or not, needs to be tuned properly in order to communicate securely. So we'll get to that. Thank you, Ryan. Tim Stelzer, floor is yours.
Thanks, Pete. It's a pleasure to be here, and this is such an important topic. I live here in Boulder, Colorado, so in the arid mountain west, and this hits home, this topic of wildfire. My neighborhood has been evacuated multiple times in the last few years due to wildfire. You don't have to live here long until you've met someone who has lost their home or loss of life because of it. So, I view this as one of the most important things that we can use technology to address in society. And so I'm the Chief Technology Officer at LineVision. And I joined because I'm just really passionate about our mission, which is to accelerate the net grid zero of the future. So we work with our utility partners to provide monitoring and advanced analytics that allow them to run the grid more safely, more resilient, and add capacity to our high voltage transmission infrastructure. Came to LineVision through about 20 years in industry, focused on IoT and the industrial Internet of Things, so using sensing and software and advanced analytics to solve these fundamental challenges that face humanity. And the power grid is an amazing one. It was the National Academy of Engineers achievement of last century. And the challenge is a lot of that same technology from last century is still running our grid today. And it's just fundamentally not capable to meet the challenges of today's world. We see the need for increasing capacity. There was a study by Princeton that we need to double the transmission infrastructure by 2035 and then triple it by 2050 to meet the needs of electrification. We need to decarbonize, obviously. There was a Lawrence Berkeley National Lab study where we have 1.4 terawatts of mostly renewable energy that's sitting in an interconnect queue just waiting to get built. And then, of course, relevant to the topic today is reliability. We're just seeing increasing challenges to deal with climate change and the proliferation of superstorm events that are leading to more public safety power shutoffs. And so all this to say, our grid was designed for last century. At LineVision, we're all about providing sensing and analytics to bring that technology into the 21st century and work with partners like Anterix and Schweitzer engineering labs to make that a reality.
Appreciate that, Tim. And again, just to fill a little bit of this between folks making comments, I come from the Washington, D.C. area, and I have had an opportunity for 7 years in my career working at the United States Department of Energy and learn about what you talked about, the historic achievement of a power grid, and then the fact that it's antiquated. Fact, if anybody watched 60 Minutes this past Sunday, there was just another show on the grid and the fact that not one person runs it, but thousands of entities. And that's, again, something just a picture. It's the most complex yet oldest infrastructure in our country, and it's one that's at risk from cyber physical, bad actors, threats, etc., vulnerabilities. But moving on to Dr. B here, who comes from the world of R&D, I will say this, Schweitzer Engineering Laboratory is not a national laboratory, but it's clearly a laboratory with some amazing folks focused on partner research. And Tim, you mentioned a couple, or at least one of the national laboratories, and you talked on the analytics and modeling and other words like image visualization. I think these are the kind of capabilities teaming with Spectrum that are part of our R&D fabric. So Ryan, please comment on what's been said, and again, your personal journey and passion for this topic.
Thank you very much, and thanks again for having me on this important topic. I think it's really good when we all get together and collaborate and solve problems together. So I joined Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories about 16 years ago. I was originally more on the IT side, and I really wanted to move over more to the operational technology side because you can really see how the operational technology mattered. Lights were on, hospitals were running, traffic lights were working, and it really came down to electrification makes the world so much a better place. When you start to electrify places, you get economic boosts, you get better quality of life. There's so many better things that happen when you provide cheap and reliable power to people around the entire world. So that kind of became a really good mission for me, is how do we continue to make the world a better place by providing cheap, reliable, and safe power. And I think what we really need to add in there is that safe for the wildfire and stuff like that. So one of the things our founder, Dr. Ed Schweitzer, always says is how fast or how long should you wait until you trip a circuit breaker during a fault? And it's really a rhetorical question. You should wait none time. You should always trip it as soon as you know it's a fault. But we have physics and we have other things that are in there. So our job is always, how do we figure out, using first principles and fundamentals, the fastest time and the fastest ways that we can possibly trip a circuit breaker? And when you think about the safety and the reliability and how the power grid works, that fits right into wildfire, it fits into safety application, it fits into so many things for just providing that safe and reliable power. So some of the stuff we'll talk about today, the technologies, is all based off of how fast can you trip a circuit breaker when you know there's a fault. And that's really what's exciting, is continuing that mission that Dr. Schweitzer started with and seeing it play off in all of these different areas and bringing that vision of basically that electrification to the world. So I'm excited. It's a fun industry. I've been in it for 16 years, still having fun every day. And I'm glad to continue working with LineVision, Anterix, and everybody else to see what it's going to be in the next 16 years.
Well, we're going to get to that at the parting shot section. So you get to wear your visionary hat, Ryan, and appreciate you and all of you. Thank you for that entree, if you will, a little bit about the passion project that this is, or program. We're going to dive a little bit deeper now into sort of some of the specifics. You know, Tim, we're going to start with you and then hit Ryan B back to you about some of the R&D, and then I'd like Ryan Gerbrandt to talk a little bit about, you know, maybe some of the complexity, and as he always does as an educator himself to an audience, is teach a little bit of what we need to know about spectrum and why 900 megahertz and private LTE matter. So sneak preview, Ryan G, you'll be on the hook. Folks, a couple words were mentioned though, reliability and resilience by Tim. Those are the two R's that people think about. They're very different. So I'm gonna encourage our audience, please watch this, Google while you're listening, and watch and Google later, or whatever search engine you use. Reliability is, you know, what it is. Resilience is, you know, how can we respond, if you will, to something as quick as possible, in so many words. Dr. Ryan mentioned safety, security, and sustainability in so many ways, shapes, and forms. Those are also terms that we need to address with you know, climate change and environmental impacts. And yes, the proliferation of devices like these that we cannot live without, that are as powerful as supercomputers were when they first came out. So as we delve into this, Tim Stelzer, you touched on LineVision and the vision and mission of your company. Clearly, there are tools and products littered across this world that say we do X, but there's no doubt in my mind that a picture's worth 1,000 words. And when you talk about modeling and simulation, I have to echo, you know, what recently was talked about in the again, spoiler alert for our audience. July 2022, the Biden-Harris administration continues efforts to address growing wildfire threats. You could Google that, and it talks about the work that's been done since a year ago when it was launched. And in that, there's a discussion on leveraging IT, which Dr. Ryan mentioned, and differentiating it from operational technology. How, Tim Stelzer, has your product portfolio focused on IT and its uniqueness to help mitigate this risk?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And maybe just to set the stage and bring it back to wildfires, you know, 90% of wildfires today are caused by human impact. And unfortunately, one of those leading contributors is the electrical transmission and distribution infrastructure. They've caused 2 out of the 3 most devastating wildfires in American history. And when you look at that, and then you think that 99.9% of our power line infrastructure today is unmonitored. So essentially, we're running blind. And so what LineVision represents is a way to provide our utility partners with really never before seen insight into how that asset is operating. And so through sensing technology and advanced analytics, we're able to monitor things like the conductor sag or the conductor blowout, which is the horizontal motion that happens in windy conditions, and derive insight about that conductor temperature. So all of this is critical information to provide our utility partners to give them insight into how their assets are operating. So it's that combination of operational technology and then leveraging communication networks and cloud computing to provide them with that data, and more than just data, but insight, so that they can run the grid more safely and more reliably. And so, just a specific point on the technology, we use LiDAR technology, which is kind of the laser equivalent of radar technology, and that allows us to, in a non-contact way, so our monitor devices are mounted on a transmission line tower or lattice structure, and without contacting the conductor itself, we're able to get a image, a picture of where that conductor is in space, and use digital twin technology to compare that to where it should be based on the operating conditions, like the amperage running down the line, the real-time weather information, the ambient temperature, and the wind speed. So all of this rich data set gives us insight into how those conductor assets are operating, and allow our utility partners to turn that information into insight to run the grid with a lot more information, and not run it blind, but run it with data, and be a data-driven organization.
You stole my word there, data-driven decision-making, number one. You're hitting on all these terms and buzzwords in DC, from cloud to analytics. I appreciate you mentioning sag and blowout. Folks, there is a term called galloping. There are things that you could Google and watch a video on when it talks about falling conductors and what happens. I mean, it's obvious once you see it that, oh my gosh, these are the kind of things physically that we need to fix. But the situational awareness, whether they're actionable or applied intelligence tools like LineVision, clearly are giving us a heads up. And I appreciated all of that, Tim, and tying it back to the OT world. Ryan, Dr. Ryan, you have a program, if I'm not mistaken, called Falling Conductor Protection. It's an application. Can you speak to a bit of that? Because I think it dovetails nicely with what Tim just spoke to.
Sure. This is something we work with SDG&E as well as Anterix on. And what we were looking to do is, if we had a conductor that broke, could we de-energize that line before the conductor hit the ground? With the obvious idea, we don't want a live conductor on the ground because of a safety issue, but also if you have a live conductor on the ground, it could start a fire. So we know from the average height of a transmission line that it takes just about under 1 second for that conductor to fall and hit the ground. And so we can detect, using our equipment on each end of the line, that we now have detected a voltage drop. And so now one voltage is out of phase with the other ones. And using our real-time automation controller, we can send signals over the Anterix network and issue a circuit breaker trip in usually about less than 1/3 of a second. And what we really wanted to know, working with Anterix on that, is could we do it reliably? Could we do it during adverse network conditions? How could we do it? Because one of the things about safe electrical power is it has to work every time. And so that's really what we needed, was deterministic and reliable communications in order to make this scheme work. So we were able to show through testing that we were able to do that very well, reliably, with certain configurations that Ryan can probably talk about more.
Well, between just understanding how quick something can happen and in milliseconds stop it before spreading, I mean, bad things can still happen. We're talking there could be, leaves and trees and things. And folks, this is where it gets to, we need to be trimming trees. Next time, drive on a neighborhood in your community and look how many trees are hanging over power lines, folks. Visual inspection is still needed, but what I like, Ryan, that you mentioned is when something like that happens, as quick as we can leverage a recloser, another buzzword, to maybe cut off and contain that before it hits the ground. That's a lifesaver. And dynamic line ratings, that's a great Google term for Mr. Tim Stelzer and LineVision. Ryan, let's tie this up here. I know, because I read it not too long ago, a white paper that you just addressed this capability, and specifically on broadband and its role, as Tim said, in helping or serving as the conduit for these signals to transmit back and forth. Why broadband? Why private broadband? Talk to us about what is way cool about spectrum that people don't understand in broadband's enabling risk mitigating function.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple angles here that I think are super important. First, for Ryan and Tim, man, I just love hearing these guys tell the kind of the stories and explanations of how their technologies work. So much innovation, I gotta say, kind of to all the audience out there that doesn't know these companies well, just absolute leadership and dominance of their subject area expertise that I just love, and it's phenomenal to be partnered with these two companies. But yeah, I think what you're getting at, Pete, is really at the heart of this, and the other applications that are out there. I think let's not fool ourselves. Wildfire mitigation, as with most grid modernization, resiliency programs and stuff are very multifaceted, right? So there's a lot of different applications and aspects to the toolkit that's appropriate to address the localized problem that we're dealing with, and even with wildfire mitigation, while these are two absolute leading edge technology solutions, it doesn't undermine the need, as you said, for sound forestry techniques, certainly environmental weather station parameters, be able to monitor the environment. There's some fantastic stuff going on in terms of data analytics that's looking at video profiling and streaming and stuff like that. But all of those categorically, what I find brings the value proposition back to what you were getting at with broadband is we're in a data-driven world, right? Every application that we're talking about has an underpinning reliance on reliable, high-speed communications to be able to take that data, from the sensor or the relay or the control mechanism, and be able to get it back to either people or machines, that can analyze that data and make decisions about what to do about it. And that to me is the world that we're living in right now. All these different applications have such a strong reliance on these kinds of systems. And these systems, in the utility space, beyond wired, we have a long history of building wired communication systems into the substations. It's a lot of fiber trenched, which is a very positive thing for utilities across the nation. But we've had historically a bit of a hodgepodge, of wireless communication systems to be able to build the last mile connectivity. And, through the couple decades that, I've been involved helping utilities build them, we've ended up with a rather bespoke set of communication networks that are fit for a purpose, but not fit holistically to be able to deal with the communications challenges that these two companies are talking about with their solutions. And that was the mission that we took on. That was looking at what was the fundamental necessity to be able to build broadband communication networks. And it came down to a lack of available spectrum to be made available to critical infrastructure industries like utilities to employ the technologies, the global standards-based technologies that we're talking about today in LTE. And our mission has been to bring that opportunity to the utility market, not just the spectrum that we're focused on, as our core asset, but to help build and develop the ecosystem now of many, with full recognition that we're at the end of the day, all of us are in solutions businesses. Even us, as kind of a spectrum and a networking company, there's no denying that utilities are looking at and get benefits from solutions. And our ability to help put those solutions together through a power of community and a power of an ecosystem helps us solve real problems faster. And that's what this comes down to. And the more that we're collectively able to build those pieces around a data architecture with standards and make those communication channels available to as many applications as possible on the grid, we can cause real change in terms of how we bring these networks to the field and these solutions, from LineVision and Schweitzer, to be able to solve these problems as fast as possible.
So Ryan, we're going to stay with you because you hit on a word, ecosystem, and I didn't want to, spoil this wonderful collaboration, community of practice, whatever you want to call it, that the Anterix Active Ecosystem represents. But we're going to pivot now, gentlemen, into partnership, collaboration, the thing that people, I think, overlook a lot, like, oh, it's just going to happen. People get along, somebody. I think we all know in this world now with what the pandemic did, it separated us. Now, physically, yes, but there's no reason we couldn't do this. But there is something that people still miss about press and flesh, which maybe makes it a little bit harder to get the right people in the room and to solve problems. And I love the term architecture, Ryan, you said, because that encompasses, just to say, because I love threes, a technical architecture, a data architecture, and a human architecture. Who are the people? In this case, we've got product, we've got engineers and research, we've got a communications company. I'm sure there's three others. Talk to us about partnership and collaboration and how you are leading that effort, you specifically, and how the ecosystem's helping. And then for Tim and Ryan, the question will be, how are you partnering individually and with your organizations to herd cats and get stuff done? I don't usually say get stuff done. There's a different S word I use, but net, just to move the needle. So Ryan, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I kind of led into it a little bit, but there's no doubt at the heart of everything we do, and I got to say, at kind of the heart of the solutions building business, that we're trying to facilitate here at Anterix is about these relationships. It's about all the companies that we're working with across what we call the Anterix Active Ecosystem Program. So we've grown from about 37 a little over a year ago when we launched it. Now I think we're over 83, which speaks to a different attribute around just how involved, I'll say, the technology, application, and solution community is, in building confidence and trust, around putting these components together to be able to solve real-world problems with utilities. I love where you went, though, Pete, with kind of the people aspect of it. I think we probably don't think about it enough, in that context. It's a lot of great technology out there. Really, it becomes the human side, about how we build trusting, lasting relationships with these companies that allows us to be more collaborative. Us ego aside, we have to accept the reality that, we're all in it for the same outcome. I know all these folks on this panel today, and almost everybody else that I encounter in and around the utility industry has an absolute passion, for the utility industry. And, they want to solve these real problems, but it's a complex landscape today. And I think it's only gotten more complex with time. That there's no single company really out there that's got everything that's necessary to solve all of these challenges. We have to find a way to be collaborative. We owe it to our utility partners that we're trying to build world-class solutions around and make them usable to the audience, which I think takes a recognition of the specifics, both strengths and weaknesses that utilities have in terms of their ability to adapt, adopt, and operationalize these kinds of solutions. We're here and capable of helping. And, I think the work that we've been able to do to get started on the AAP has been, fundamental in moving that forward. But one thing I'll come back to earlier in the summer, to further enhance our capabilities to be connected with not just the ecosystem side, but to build those relationships and the continuity specifically back with the utility industry. We launched what we describe as our Utility Strategic Advisory Board. And we did that with a specific intent to not just have the ecosystem members, kind of communicating and participating amongst themselves, but to have a direct connection with the C-suite of the nation's utilities who can help give us the best guidance possible in terms of where their most critical issues are, in the best possible way that we can garner the support of the whole ecosystem to be able to collaborate and solve that. And it's been remarkable. I think the ability to hear from these leaders, these absolute thought leaders in the industry firsthand, of what keeps them up at night, whether it's wildfires or clean energy transition or reliability and resiliency. They're communicating openly with us, and we will use that collectively across the ecosystem to really address the challenges that they're facing today. And I think it's going to help the entire industry. It's going to help us be agile, and ultimately define and develop these solutions that we know utilities are telling us they want to adopt.
Well, Ryan, thank you. And folks, the Anterix Active Ecosystem, its Strategic Advisory Board, their Security Collective. I mean, you're not going to find a company that necessarily is doing any more intentional effort to bring communities together. And while they have the infrastructure and the spectrum, they know, I feel, that they're not in it alone. They're not a black box you buy and then you're good to go. And I appreciate that. And, you know, Ryan, you come from the world of IoT and the IIoT, the man from Manitoba, and I appreciate your passion. You did mention something that is this fit for purpose, and I want to just remind folks that there is no stock solution. As we move to Dr. Ryan, up in the right corner of my quadrant, technology diligence. Anterix talks about, you know, partnerships. Everybody has a capability. And we'll get to that, Tim, with why LineVision's unique. But Ryan, in those early stages of R&D, technology readiness, and really looking at, you know, maybe something will be built and transferred and commercialized. Can you talk a little bit how important it is at SEL to work with other partners in R&D as well as solution providers?
Yeah, and I'll also throw in customers as well, utility partners. A lot of times, the very hardest thing to do is come up with that creative spark. So what is the problem that really needs to be solved? Of going after the problems that are really hard and we don't know how to solve yet. So there's a good book called The Inventor's Dilemma, which really talks about how do you make step changes in the industry. And it's not an incremental change at a time, but how do you go after those really hard problems and make a step change in the industry? And those are the challenges we like. We have engineering in our middle name for a reason. We like to go after those and take those hard problems. And the way we do that is we have to partner with the utility customers, partner with other solution providers, because a lot of times those hard problems, we have to know what they are. What is it? And then it's probably not a single product that is going to necessarily be the solution. So what is the entire solution that goes after that more difficult problem? So that's where the partnerships really come in. And a lot of times it's different for every utility. I think, Pete, you mentioned the US grid is owned by a lot of different operators. And then that actually does add some security and strength into it because of the diversity, but also at the same time, like you mentioned, every solution that we have to engineer is different. Every problem is different. And so working closely with our utility partners to understand what those problems are, how to operate the grid more efficient, it takes that time and effort and that passion for learning and understanding how the grid operates in order to make it operate better in the future.
So Dr. Ryan, let me just follow on as a shout out to our wonderful national treasures, the national labs. Do you have some maybe an example or an exemplar of just something you're working on now, or that just working with these institutions, which are not energy labs, everybody? They do a lot more than energy. Can you just, as a shout out to the wonderful national treasures of our laboratories that are our labs?
Yeah, so part of the SEDS program, there was an energy roadmap, and we worked as part of the DOE program on several projects, bringing in security gateways, software-defined networking, serial encryption, a bunch of different technologies to enhance the cybersecurity of the grid over a roadmap of 5 or 10 years. So it was a really cool program where we were accelerating technology from academia and national labs into manufacturing and then ultimately onto the power grid. And so I was principal investigator for several of those projects that we've done and successfully deployed many of those solutions through utilities throughout the United States. I think last time I looked, all 50 states had products that came from those projects.
There you go.
So it's nationwide impact.
Absolutely. And I love all, people say all roads lead back to, well, I say Greece. I'm Greek, but at the same time, all roads, I like to say sometimes from an R&D lead back to our national labs and their engineering communities. A couple things that I love that you said, creative spark and the customer, amen to that. And that's where we're going to pivot over here to LineVision. The entrepreneurial spirit is part of that. Government meets industry, and I mean all levels of government, folks, not just federal. Government meets industry, partners like Anterix who have their passion, the R&D side, but there's the folks that I say are the 3 and 4 gals in a truck who have an idea, and sometimes getting that into a lab to mature it is a challenge. But the entrepreneurial spirit and the customer, voice of the customer, is critical. I love the word diversity. There are a lot of products, and folks, as Ryan pointed out, Ryan G, Anterix is in the business of fit for purpose. What is it, the problem that you may have at a utility with data collection? Maybe it's LineVision, maybe it's LineVision plus something else for advanced analytics, but complementary capability is something that businesses should be looking at when it's building out that architecture. And most importantly, yes, great job on the Cyber Energy Delivery System, SEDS, good old DOE and its offices of electricity, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and now CSER, cybersecurity, energy security, emergency response. Get to know those organizations. So thank you, Dr. B. Tim, the entrepreneurial spirit, you know, you have an idea, you want people to know about it. Tell us about that collaboration effort.
For sure, and appreciate the comments from Ryan and Ryan. I feel like I got a PhD in R&D from Dr. B there, and you're throwing out a lot of acronyms as well, Pete, so just trying to keep up with you. And you know, to Ryan's point on partnerships, in my mind, it's all about time to market. Like, these problems that we're trying to solve are existential threats for humanity, and we don't have the luxury of time. We can't wait to solve wildfire. We can't wait to decarbonize our electric grid. And that's the real imperative that I see around partnerships and an ecosystem is, look, we're trying to innovate on really complex solutions here. Everything covering LiDAR sensing to network communication, advanced analytics, machine learning, and AI, and all those buzzwords, you know, cybersecurity. We're trying to do this and innovate and do it in a time frame that can meet the needs of our utility partners. And so without this collaborative spirit and partnership with companies like Anterix and Schweitzer, we can't bring our products to market fast enough to meet the needs of our utility clients. You know, we're currently working with 7 of the biggest utilities in the US and rolling out our sensing and analytics technology to allow them to run the grid in a more reliable, more safe, more abundant manner. And we really can't do it without partnerships, and we can't do it without that spirit of innovation and entrepreneurism that you mentioned, Pete. So our roots is as a young company. We're about 4 years old and have spun out and quickly established ourselves as a market leader and through R&D and innovation. And that's my role as Chief Technology Officer, is really charting that vision of where we see the needs of the industry and our customers going, and designing product roadmap that is going to meet the needs of our customer. And again, that comes back to partnerships, everyone focusing on what their core competency is, and then looking for standardization and things like APIs, where we can bring in partners and accelerate our time to market to serve the needs of our customers and of society, frankly.
Well said, folks. I think, well, one of my tweetables would have been like existential threat to humanity. I mean, that hit me. So you know, I felt it, Tim. So thank you. Product roadmap, standardization, 100% APIs, folks. If you're a software developer, if when you buy an application, you know, things are supposed to work with other things. That's why we have standards bodies. Sometimes they're avoided or they're not dealt with, and then things don't work and everybody's pointing fingers. But this world is complex. To Ryan G's point, tuning spectrum at a 900 megahertz band is not something that, you know, is as easy as at the 800 or at the gigahertz. There's reasons there are bands of radiomagnetic spectrum, and for certain purposes, obviously, an R&D is a part of that. And I just love, I hope everybody's getting a sense these folks work together, right? And there's other partners involved. I want to give a shout out just to kind of bring this back to some just perspective. You know, this effort of growing wildfire threat. We talked about just a year ago and how many more we're having now. I mean, folks, watch the news, read whatever newspaper you have, check out beyond your zip code, you know, what's going on in parts of, you know, rural America, in our tribal regions, in the underserved areas. But some of what we're trying to drive in our country is, yes, leverage spectrum and leverage R&D and leverage the great IT community that's there, but expanding partner research, our PNNL, our National Accelerator Laboratory out there in San Mateo, the Oak Ridge National Lab. They're dealing with things like electrical arcing, another buzzword, electrical arcing, Just Google that on a video and see what that means. That's like, power jumping from one line to another and causing things to happen. It's freakish, but it's real. I mean, that's physical concern. Providing trained and equipped military personnel and aviation assets to support firefighting operations. Tools being used for analytics and training are part of this wildfire discussion. Enhancing, obviously, fire detection capabilities. NOAA is doing great work through the Department of Commerce. The FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is it's building resilient infrastructure and communities program. A big deal you should read about. These are efforts that are happening with your tax dollars to create a more resilient humanity. And then advanced modeling capabilities to support fire management. These are terms and things called out from our nation's leadership on the Hill and in the White House. So great stuff. Obviously, there were some buzzwords that are throughout. So if anybody watches this again, we could spend hours on, like I said, what's CBRS and what's private LTE and what's the third generation partnership project, but those are ones you should look up as well. All right, so let's move into, we know everybody needs to work together and everybody's well-intentioned and it doesn't stop. To me, this word continuous, you get up every day and you don't think, well, I'm there now, I'm working together, everything's fine. It's a continuous effort to communicate, to collaborate, to build product. I'm going to just ask because I don't know where you're going to go with it, but Ryan G, what's not working? Where can we improve some semblance of moving this needle so we can crush the inertia?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to come back. I think Tim hit on a really important point. I'm going to put it in the context of urgency, in terms of how I'm thinking about that question, Pete. Let's take a step back. As we talked about, we're talking about a engineering marvel, that was built to engineering standards and technology available from a generation ago, decades and decades ago. I think a big part that the realization we're coming to and that we're talking about now is not only do we have a new technology portfolio, and it's inherently digital, it's inherently connected, it's inherently database, that draws to a different set of fundamentals about how we would think about it. I'll often connect it back, though, to the environmental side. The environmental requirements, were certainly part of the design assumptions that went into how people thought about, the building of that system, back, a generation ago. The temperature, the ambient temperatures, that Tim and the team know so well. The way that the conductors, are strung and the tension. We're dealing with a new environmental standard. The environmental conditions, the ability for winds to hit, kind of record levels on a much more regular level. The storms, whether it be hurricane or ice or whatever it is, we have a new reality. And, we need to embrace that reality as we're thinking about this new architecture and the development of the various components of the grid. Now, that's complicated. That's going to take time. It's going to take overbuild. It's going to take a process for us as an industry to go through. But coming back to the fundamentals, I think if we were to architect, starting again, say we had a crystal ball and we could do it all again, we would recognize, the foundational necessity of some of the other components, of the system. And the one big one I want to focus on is kind of the communications backbone. It's an enabler. It's an opportunity for adoption, and rapid, development of applications and use cases, and analytics and machine learning, and all these different things that the team are talking about. Unfortunately, we've kind of looked at communications, I would say, as an industry, as almost a means to an end. It was a necessary component of a solution stack. It wasn't a value proposition in its own right. And, I think there's a different, more fundamental, foundational way that we need to be thinking about, kind of the evolution of these broadband communications capabilities to make the adoption of solutions like LineVision and Falling Conductor easier and faster. And do that in a way that builds, incrementally towards being able to unlock the future capability of, what I'm envisioning, Pete, is kind of the garage entrepreneur, the what we don't even know today, capabilities for this space. That's what we're going to get to. I absolutely believe that, with a fundamental passion. But I think it forces us to think a little bit about it differently, back to the challenge and where urgency, I think, can come from. We spend a lot of time, I think Tim was talking about this, with kind of having available technologies, but we spend a lot of time with utilities assisting kind of the rationalization of costs and cost models and business models and stuff like that. I think faced with a scenario like wildfire mitigation, It's unfortunate. Tim, you picked a great word, kind of an existential threat. There's not a lot of many vulnerabilities out there as an industry face that can, one, cause loss of life, and two, I'll cite, it's not that long ago that wildfires cost bankruptcy to one of the largest utilities in the West Coast. There's not many issues out there of that kind of category where now you can count the dollar impacts in the billions, in terms of what's the cost of doing nothing. And I think we got to change the way that we're thinking about it. It's easy after $1 billion expenditure and liabilities and a loss of life to think about why didn't we do that? And I find we habitually, kind of have that reaction to these issues. How do we bring that into the context of the conversation proactively? If you start looking at this as a multi-billion-dollar issue, it changes the priority. I think it changes the way we think about it, and might help us, kind of as an industry get over some of these cost plus scenarios, that frankly, I think slow us down. I think it slows us down in terms of the adoption. But just my 2 cents, in terms of an opportunity that I see for us all collectively and as an industry in partnership. This isn't laying blame by any stretch of the imagination, but for us to put our thoughts together about how we adapt and embrace it.
I'll take those 25 cents, brother, because that was awesome. And I loved you emphasizing. And again, the question isn't what we're doing wrong. It's sometimes like rephrasing, what can we be doing better? We know where the bar is. We're having more wildfires this year. That could be Mother Nature. There's a reason, and it could be physical. It could be, are we trimming enough trees? Do we have the right tools? And I appreciate that. You mentioned the environmental concerns, climate and impact. And again, this isn't a discussion today about where you stand on what aisle about that, but the reality is, look, climate change is not something that is one camp, right? Mother Nature reigns supreme. There are floods, there are hurricanes, there are typhoons, there are tsunamis, there are lightning strikes, and stuff happens. And how can we save more lives? Because generally there's something bad that happens there. So thank you, Ryan, for just emphasizing that. I loved it. Let's go to Tim. Tim, you sell products. I know one of your challenges is just getting people to listen and saying, I already got a tool that does that.
Yeah.
But what can we be doing better, maybe in your case, to say, look, we're not competing with others. We just have one of those tools that you need in your toolbox.
For sure. And just to build off of what Ryan said, around kind of the incentive structure and the cost plus model, that can certainly be a limitation. You asked what isn't working. And so sometimes that is a limiter to adopting new technology, especially technology that represents an efficiency gain, right? So I mentioned the need to double our transmission infrastructure by 2035 to meet our climate objectives. The traditional way of doing that is stringing more poles and wires. And that's an expensive endeavor that can take decades. And again, to that urgency point, we don't have that amount of time to wait. So I think there's a regulatory side that can play a part here, and we're encouraged by a lot of the recent regulatory structure changes. FERC Order 881, you can look that one up. Of course, some of the investment that we're seeing through the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Acts and now the Inflation Reduction Act are all positive investment areas. And then I'll just leave with one other thing that maybe isn't working well today. You mentioned earlier, Pete, dynamic line ratings. So the way that the grid is often operated today, and we determine how much capacity is run down the lines, is through what's called a static line rating. And that essentially takes a very conservative, usually, estimate on what the ambient weather conditions are and puts that in the ceiling of how much amperage we can safely run down the line. We know the reality is, sometimes it's a cool day. Sometimes the wind is blowing. A stat that we like to quote is a 1 meter per second wind across that conductor cools it enough to increase the amperage capacity on that line by about 40%. So you trade that off versus building new poles and wires. And what we feel at LineVision is through sensing and analytics, we can provide insight into how to run that grid and unlock additional capacity that may not be used. And on the flip side, identify those scenarios where the amperage on the line may actually be unsafe because the static line rating assumptions are not conservative enough. So again, it comes back to running a grid with data and intelligence and insight versus just running it blind.
Well, Tim, really quick, just you hit on the regulatory from NERC to FERC. You called one out, 881. I have been doing some work around an order that addresses using cloud services and the feasibility. So all the folks who are not a fan of the cloud and think it's the devil, look, there's with more devices and the ability to leverage AI and machine learning and do visualization and analytics on data. Yes, there's a volume, velocity, and veracity of it. Absolutely. Tools like yours with others can create that picture for that insight that I love that you have emphasize, and that creates efficiency. So amen to that. Ryan, what could we be doing more of? Ryan B, sorry.
Ryan B, what can we be doing more of? I'll take there's two things I think we can do. I'll take a little bit off with Tim with the regulatory. I think what we need to watch out with the regulatory is we still need to make that the electric power is economical for everyone. And I know that's what a lot of the regulatory does. And I think sometimes the regulatory takes a little bit of a bad rap for that. But it's interesting watching the regulatory really trying to make sure that everybody has access to economical power because it makes life better for everyone. So I think we need to figure out how to work within that regulatory structure that still provides that common access to power for everyone. I think that's an important part. And the second one is what we see is as we add more renewables, as we add more generation, the renewables are a lot less dense than the traditional sources that we have now. So what that means for the utilities is there is a lot more maintenance. And so how do we economically scale these solutions so that the utilities can continue to adopt and bring on these new technologies, but in a way that scales economically and efficiently? And I think the only way we can do that is by looking at systems. I don't think we can look at what does SEL do, what does LineVision do, what does Anterix do. I think these have to be viewed as here's an entire system. And when you put them together, this is the benefit that the utility gets. And by using that scale and economy, you still keep prices low for the end users.
Well said, well said. And that is there's standards for a reason and there's capabilities. And if you're fortunate to match your problem, your need, and your system with a solution, it's never cookie cutter. Well said. Okay. Guys, take about a minute and a half. We want you to put on your visionary hats. And the question out there is, 2 years from now, with all that we talked about today, we know there's advancements always. Where do you think our, as we called it, antiquated grid or how we communicate? Paint a little bit of a picture, at least of what you think is going to be the case. Ryan Gerbrandt.
Yeah, great question. Let me put it in the perspective of kind of innovation, because I think that's what we're going to see. I'll draw correlation to, we can probably all put this in perspective, kind of us as consumers, what we've seen and kind of the change of landscape with the adoption of broadband, right? The devices in your pocket, the internet, all the e-commerce applications, Amazon, Uber, real-time connectivity for social apps and stuff like that. Those weren't conceived of, when the physical infrastructure, the wires and cables, that came in the advent of the internet. I think we're on that kind of an evolution, in the infrastructure and the utility space. As we start building these communication fabrics, these platforms, I think the rampant kind of innovation, that we saw dominate the consumer landscape is going to play out in the industrial sector. We got to make these tools available so that you can tap into the innovation, Silicon Valley or anywhere else in the world for that matter, that does something powerful and informative with that data or with the information or with IoT, kind of whatever it is, but those capabilities will come out as I come back to what I said earlier, kind of with the foundational components that we're talking about, and that excites me. I just think that's a great world to be living in, where, we can have a rapid, agile, innovation cycle that solves not just today's problems, but, starts to build a portfolio of solutions for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Well said, Ryan G. Tim, floor is yours.
Yeah, 100% agree with what Ryan said, and I'll leave with just a really short vision of what I see for the future, and that's digital transformation for the power grid. There's no doubt that the grid is decentralizing, it's digitizing, it's decarbonizing. And when I think about digital transformation concepts, in addition to the digitization and the data and the software, all those are key elements. And I also want to emphasize a really important point that we don't lose sight of the human element, and that is around change management. This is a fundamental change in how we're going to operate the grid. And digital transformation concepts is not just about the technology, it's about the people and winning the hearts and minds and managing that change, because it's a significant and a fundamental one.
Well said, Tim. I loved your, you have an alliteration thing going on. I love it. Digitization and decarbonization, two complementary terms. Dr. Ryan.
So where I see the grid going is more along the digital transformation, but we're going to have to scale, and we're going to have to be effective in our solutions as we build them. That means we're going to have to partner and work closer together. Right now, it kind of really makes me sad with the solution that we've come up with at this point to when we have high winds and different things and fire-prone areas is to just turn off the power to those areas that are affected. So what I really want to be able to see is how do we enable the power system to leave the power on in those conditions, but still make it safe that we're not going to be a fire risk, and you're still going to have safe, reliable power. And so I think the solutions that we're working on, whether it's with a good communications backbone or whether it's through the physics of the power system itself or using optics and LiDAR to measure the lines, I think all of these solutions together is what's going to help us achieve a power grid that can always be on and also be safe.
A modern grid, a smart grid. I love that. Okay. Folks, we do have 3 minutes. Our audience, you're going to get a parting shot of 30 seconds or less from our guests, and I'm going to close it out. Ryan G., what do you want to leave with the audience?
I'm going to leave with kind of what we started. I think just to keep people back to kind of the growing importance and just how critical this issue is. You know, this is an energy-related topic, but has consequences of loss of life, billions of dollars, you know, of capital, you know, and infrastructure loss. I think that should bring it to the top of our attention, you know, in terms of how we think about it, how we prioritize our efforts toward it. And I agree with Ryan. You know, it is disappointing to a certain extent, you know, that we've got certain capabilities, and the answer is kind of as simple as shutting off the power. You know, when there's a risk, you know, we need this energy. You know, kind of back to the overall equation of what we're dealing with. It's kind of the not so perfect storm, I'll call it. You know, of the combination between what's happening, you know, from the environmental and the pressure side that wildfires cause and natural disasters. Our use of this network is only going up right now. You know, when I think about the electrification of everything into transportation and the criticality of it, you know, the not so perfect storm is kind of the compounding challenges that's going to create. You know, as we get more reliant on it in our everyday lives, we drive it even further. Just think of it when you start pushing it into transportation. You know, not being able to charge your vehicles and the consequences of the only alternative being a shut off the power system. It's not going to scale. You know, it's not going to work that way.
Well said. Tim Stelzer.
Yeah, I'll leave the audience with a quote from my personal favorite founding father. So when it comes to wildfire, I was thinking that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I think we all know that quote from Ben Franklin. Many people may not know that he said this in 1736 to remind the citizens of Philadelphia to remain vigilant about fire awareness and prevention. So it's very apropos to our topic today. And so I'm just happy, you know, at LineVision to be part of this, partnering with, you know, folks like Schweitzer, who are developing the reclosure circuits and the sensing, you know, Anterix that's providing a secure private LTE backbone to underpin this communication channel, and then, you know, LineVision presenting the data and the analytics to run the grid in a much more data-driven way.
Wonderful, wonderful. Go City of Brotherly Love. Ryan B.
I think that these collaborations are really, really cool, and I think they're necessary for the continued growth of electricity around the world and our nation. And to me, that's why I first joined SEL 16 years ago, is I believe this is the future to make electric power safer, more reliable, and more economical for everyone.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you. My parting shot is a big time thanks to Ryan, Tim, and everybody who helped pull this together. It was an honor to be a part of it. I want to say that be on the lookout as Anterix is collaborating with TD World on a ebook on wildfires. It should be out in November, so that will be exciting. And tune in next month for episode 17, where we will dive into the bipartisan infrastructure law. And we hope you tune in for that next Industry Insight. So have a great rest of your day, and thank you for tuning in.